Close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine this. It's Paris, the summer of 1572, August 24th to be exact. As the city slowly stirs, the bells of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois Church begin to toll. It's 5 in the morning. Now, usually, that sound would be a peaceful call to prayer, signaling the start of a new day. But on this particular morning, those bells were anything but peaceful. They were a signal of hell. They were the signal for the beginning of the most brutal massacre in French history. Within just a few hours, the picturesque streets of Paris would transform. Instead of bustling markets and charming alleys, they would become rivers of blood. Thousands of French Protestants, a group we know as the Huguenots, would be savagely murdered, not by some invading army, but by their own Catholic countrymen. Think about that for a second. What began as a grand royal wedding celebration, a symbol of hope and unity, would quickly devolve into one of Europe's greatest religious atrocities. For 3 days, Paris would endure absolute horror. Armed Catholic mobs would hunt down Huguenots house by house, street by street. They didn't discriminate. Men, women, children, the elderly, no one was spared. Bodies would be mutilated, thrown into the Seine River, turning the water red. Paris, the city of lights, would become a living hell on earth, shocking all of Christendom. It's a moment in history that makes you really wonder, how did France get to this point of barbarity? What could possibly transform neighbors into murderers and a royal celebration into a bloodbath this unspeakable? If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who might learn from it, and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into history. And if you're hungry for more, check out our full playlist on historical massacres, or religious conflicts, or dark moments in European history. Choose what fits your playlist best, right here. We'd also love to read your thoughts in the comments below. This is just the beginning of a truly gripping and tragic story. If you're already hooked and find this historical dive compelling, please take a quick moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us bring more untold histories to light. You can also explore our playlist of other shocking historical events or other relevant playlist title for more deep dives. But for now, don't go anywhere, because the full, chilling explanation of how this tragedy unfolded is just about to begin. So, how did this vibrant, cultured nation become a cauldron of religious hatred? The seeds of this coming horror were sown deep within French society, long before those bells rang. You see, ever since Martin Luther kicked off the Protestant Reformation in 1517, the old order of Catholic Europe was under siege. New ideas, new ways of thinking about faith were spreading like wildfire. And in France, these Protestants were known as the Huguenots. Now, they weren't the majority, maybe about 10% of the population, but don't let that number fool you. They weren't just common folk. They included many powerful nobles, influential families, and a rapidly growing class of prosperous merchants. They were gaining power, gaining influence, and that naturally made the established Catholic order incredibly nervous. Imagine the tension. Your neighbor, your fellow citizen, suddenly believes something fundamentally different about God, about salvation. For many, this wasn't just a theological debate. It felt like a direct threat to the very fabric of society, to the eternal souls of their families. It turned towns against each other, families against families. Into this volatile mix, you had a monarchy that was, frankly, a mess. After King Henry II died in a freak jousting accident in 1559, a truly bizarre twist of fate, the throne fell to his young, weak sons. First Francis II, who was basically a puppet of the powerful, fiercely Catholic Guy's family. Then, when Francis died prematurely, his 10-year-old brother, Charles IX, inherited the crown. So, who was really in charge? His mother, Catherine de' Medici. Now, Catherine was no ordinary queen. She was intelligent, ambitious, and utterly, profoundly Machiavellian. Her only real concern wasn't God or even the French people, but keeping her family, the Valois dynasty, on that throne. She was prepared to use any means necessary to achieve that goal. Initially, she even tried a policy of religious tolerance. Not because she believed in it, mind you, but because she needed to balance these two warring factions, the Catholics and the Protestants, just to maintain some semblance of control over a kingdom that was rapidly fragmenting. It was a cold, calculated game of power, with human lives as pawns. But that fragile balancing act couldn't last. In 1562, the French Wars of Religion officially began. What started as simmering religious tensions boiled over into a brutal, decades-long civil war. On one side, you had the staunch Catholics, led by the House of Guise, heavily backed by Spain and the Pope. On the other, the Huguenots, commanded by the House of Bourbon, with support from England and the German Protestant states. For a decade, France bled. It was a cycle of intermittent conflict, but each pause was just a breath before the next storm. Cities were sacked, the countryside was devastated, and with every atrocity committed by both sides, and make no mistake, there were atrocities on both sides, the hatred between Catholics and Protestants intensified. Minor massacres became common. Catholics killing Huguenots in one town, Protestants retaliating by destroying churches and killing priests in another. It was a horrifying spiral, transforming what should have been a shared nation into a battleground where faith became a weapon and neighbors became mortal enemies. Amidst this chaos and bloodshed, Catherine de' Medici hatched a desperate plan. A plan she hoped would finally bring peace to her fractured kingdom. But instead, it would set the stage for unimaginable horror. It all began with a wedding. Picture this, a grand royal wedding, a symbol of peace, hope, and reconciliation after years of brutal civil war. Sounds perfect, right? But what if that very event was actually designed to be a trap? Or, at the very least, became the ultimate catalyst for an unspeakable tragedy? In the midst of France's bleeding chaos, Catherine de' Medici, ever the pragmatist, developed a bold new strategy to pacify the kingdom. Her idea: a matrimonial alliance. She proposed marrying her Catholic daughter, Margaret of Valois, to Henry of Navarre, the most prominent Protestant leader in France and the heir to the House of Bourbon. On paper, it was genius. This marriage would represent a reconciliation between the two warring religious factions. It could finally bring peace to a kingdom torn apart by decades of violence. But getting to that wedding day was no easy feat. Negotiations dragged on for months, facing fierce resistance from both sides. The most extreme Catholics, especially those loyal to Henry of Guise, saw this union as nothing short of a betrayal of their Catholic faith, a humiliating capitulation to Protestant heretics. You can almost hear their outrage. How dare our princess marry him? This is an insult to God. On the Huguenot side, many were deeply suspicious of Catherine de' Medici's true intentions. They whispered among themselves, wondering if she was setting a clever trap for their leaders. They knew her reputation for cunning. Could this really be a genuine peace offering or just a sophisticated lure? Despite all that opposition, the wedding was finally scheduled for August 1572. Paris, the magnificent capital, prepared to host thousands of Protestant nobles. They streamed into the city for the celebration, bringing with them their principal leaders. Among them was Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, a man who had become almost a father figure to the young King Charles IX, an increasingly influential voice at court. Coligny's presence in Paris was particularly provocative to the Catholic extremists. Many saw him as the true power behind the throne, subtly pushing King Charles IX towards a foreign policy that favored Dutch Protestants against Catholic Spain, France's great rival. And then there was Henry of Guise, who harbored a deep, personal hatred for Coligny, blaming him for his own father's death in one of the earlier religious wars. So you have all these powerful players with their personal grudges and political agendas converging in one city. The wedding festivities began on August 18th, 1572. The ceremony itself was held at Notre Dame Cathedral with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect. But the tension in the air was palpable, almost suffocating. Think about the symbolism. Henry of Navarre, as a Protestant, couldn't even enter the cathedral during Mass. He had to wait outside, while his Catholic bride participated in the full ceremony. This small, symbolic detail alone screamed just how fragile this supposed reconciliation truly was. In the days that followed, Paris was a blur of elaborate celebrations, feasts, dances, jousting tournaments, but underneath it all, incidents between Catholics and Protestants were growing. Street fights were becoming common. The Catholic population of Paris, traditionally deeply devout and often fanatical, looked with simmering anger at the sheer presence of so many heretics in their sacred city. The air was thick with mistrust, suspicion, and a volatile mix of hope and simmering rage. It was a powder keg, just waiting for a spark. And that spark came not from a direct confrontation, but from a calculated, chilling act that would unravel everything, plunging Paris into an abyss of horror. The target, the very man many hoped would bridge the divide. So Paris was a powder keg, ready to blow. All it needed was a spark. And that spark came not from a clash of armies, but from a single, chilling act aimed at the very man many hoped would bridge the divide between Catholics and Protestants. What happened next would unleash a torrent of unimaginable violence. The event that truly ignited the tragedy occurred on the morning of August 22nd. Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, that influential Protestant leader and trusted advisor to the young King Charles IX, was returning from the Louvre Palace. Suddenly, a shot rang out from a window, an arquebus, a heavy, early form of rifle. Coligny fell, gravely wounded. The assassination attempt failed to kill him, but it left the admiral bleeding and bedridden. The immediate reaction was explosive. The Huguenots, understandably, instantly accused the powerful Guise family of attempted murder. The Guises, of course, flatly denied any involvement. But the seeds of suspicion, already deeply planted, now began to sprout into outright fury. King Charles IX himself was genuinely shocked by the attack on his advisor. He wasn't a strong king, but he had a real affection for Coligny, and he immediately promised a complete investigation, swearing to punish those responsible. He wanted justice. But his reaction, meant to calm the waters, actually poured gasoline on the fire. For the Catholic extremists, who already saw Coligny as a heretic controlling their young king, this royal protection was proof positive that the king was being manipulated, even Protestantized. The tension in Paris, already at a dangerous simmer, now reached a full, terrifying boiling point. Everyone felt it. The air was thick with foreboding. It was in this critical, terrifying moment that Catherine de' Medici made the most fateful decision of her life. Think about her position. She feared that any serious investigation into the attack on Coligny might implicate her own family, or at the very least, the powerful Guises whom she needed to keep on her side. And beyond that, she was deeply, perhaps pathologically, concerned about the growing Protestant influence over her impressionable young son, King Charles IX. She saw her power, her dynasty, truly threatened. In her mind, there was only one solution, a brutal, definitive one, to completely eliminate the Huguenot leadership. So, on the night of August 23rd, Catherine de' Medici embarked on her ultimate act of manipulation. She went to her son, King Charles IX, and convinced him that the Protestants, enraged by the attack on Coligny, were actually planning a massive revolt to avenge their leader. She painted an apocalyptic scenario. The Huguenots would take Paris, kill the royal family, and establish a heretical republic. The royal council meeting that night was one of the most dramatic in French history. Catherine, supported by her other son, Henry of Anjou, the future Henry III, and other zealous Catholic advisors, argued relentlessly that they had to act first. They pressed Charles, showing him visions of a Protestant Paris, a ruined Catholic monarchy. King Charles IX, despite being only 22 years old, initially tried to resist. He had a genuine bond with Coligny, and the thought of authorizing a massacre horrified him. But the psychological pressure exerted by his mother and his advisors was relentless. They hammered away at him, making it a question of dynastic survival, telling him that hesitation meant the destruction of the French Catholic monarchy. Finally, sometime around midnight, King Charles IX buckled. He yielded to the pressure and authorized what was chillingly described as a surgical operation, only to eliminate the most dangerous Huguenot leaders. The list included Coligny, along with about 50 other prominent Protestant nobles. Henry of Navarre, his new son-in-law, would be spared for now. The operation was supposed to be quick, silent, limited only to these key targets. A clean, decisive blow. But as dawn broke on August 24th, the plan, meant to be precise and limited, spiraled into something far beyond anyone's control. The surgical operation transformed into an indiscriminate bloodbath, fueled by hatred and misunderstanding, turning Paris into a scene of unimaginable carnage. My apologies, You are absolutely right. This moment deserves more than just a brief recounting. It demands to be felt, to be experienced in its chilling depth. We will make this the true, visceral climax of our story, lingering on the horror with every descriptive tool available. At 5 a.m., the plan was simple, a precise, surgical strike. But the moment those first sword blades tasted blood and the first screams tore through the pre-dawn quiet, a dam broke. A terrifying, ancient fury, held captive by decades of simmering hate, was finally unleashed. What followed was not a strategic operation, but a descent into utter, indiscriminate madness. Paris was about to drown in its own blood. The early morning hours of August 24th began with the methodical execution of that chilling plan. Soldiers from the Swiss and French guards, acting under the direct command of Henry of Guise himself, moved silently through the hushed streets, heading straight for the residences of the designated targets. Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, still recovering from his wounds, was the first to fall. Dragged from his bed, he was brutally dispatched by men who had likely feigned loyalty just hours before. It was a cold, calculated act of vengeance for Guise's father. Swift, targeted. It was supposed to be the end of it. But what should have been a limited, clandestine operation quickly, catastrophically, spiraled out of control. The chilling sound of gunshots, the guttural screams of victims echoing through the narrow Parisian streets, began to awaken the slumbering Catholic population. And then, the bells. The very bells of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, initially intended merely to coordinate the military strike, were suddenly heard differently by the waking city. For the fervent Catholic populace, already primed with decades of fear, suspicion, and fervent belief in their own righteous cause, those tolling bells were not a signal for a king's order. They were interpreted, perhaps even misinterpreted, as a divine call to arms, a sacred summons from heaven itself to cleanse the city, to exterminate every single heretic within its hallowed walls. A holy war, right here, right now. And with that twisted divine sanction, a beast was unleashed from the deepest human shadows. What followed was one of the most horrifying episodes in European history, a tableau of unspeakable barbarity that defied all semblance of civilization. Catholic mobs, not just soldiers, but ordinary citizens. The baker from down the street, the cobbler you bought shoes from, your very neighbors, armed themselves with anything they could find. Swords, knives, axes, even pitchforks, clubs, and paving stones. They poured into the streets like a rampaging, bloodthirsty tide, driven by fanaticism and a terrifying sense of righteous fury. Their singular, terrifying purpose: to hunt down and kill Protestants. There was no distinction, no mercy. No pleading glance, no wailing child, no frail elder was spared. Any person suspected of being a Huguenot, even by the barest whisper, was murdered on the spot, often in ways that defy human comprehension and make the blood run cold. Streets that hours before had echoed with wedding music, with laughter and the gentle murmur of daily life, now transformed into scenes of unadulterated primal horror. Picture it. Entire families trapped in their homes, their sanctuaries turned into charnel houses, annihilated in their beds or cowering in corners. Children, too young to even understand the hatred, were ripped from their mothers' arms, their tiny bodies brutally dashed against stone walls, their innocent cries abruptly silenced. Pregnant women were mowed down, their bellies slashed open, their unborn children torn from them in grotesque displays of savagery. Men were tortured, castrated, their final moments filled with unimaginable agony before being mercifully dispatched. The air itself grew thick with the stench of blood, smoke, and fear. The beautiful Seine River, usually a serene artery of the city, literally turned a horrifying, churning red with the blood of thousands. Bodies, mutilated and defiled, were thrown into the water in such staggering quantities that they formed grotesque, floating mountains of corpses, jamming the river, a horrific testament to the scale of the slaughter. It was a river of death, flowing through a city of ghosts. The violence wasn't limited to killing alone. It was a carnival of desecration, driven by a twisted religious zeal. Catholics looted Protestant houses with frenzied glee, stripping them bare of valuables before setting them ablaze, their flames licking at the night sky, adding to the infernal glow over Paris. Protestant bookshops, symbols of dissenting thought and freedom of conscience, were systematically burned to the ground, their heretical works turned to ash, a symbol of intellectual eradication. Even the dead were not spared from this rabid hatred. Bodies were routinely mutilated, decapitated, dismembered, and displayed as grim trophies. Heads were stuck on pikes and proudly paraded through the streets, chilling symbols of victory meant to instill terror and absolute submission. Meanwhile, within the grand walls of the Louvre Palace, King Charles IX, the young monarch who had given the initial order for a surgical strike, was trapped. He slowly, agonizingly, realized the colossal, monstrous magnitude of the massacre he had unleashed. This wasn't precision. This was an uncontrollable inferno. Accounts describe him as reportedly horrified, a young man watching his own capital dissolve into madness. He desperately tried to stop the violence. He sent out troops to restore order, issued royal proclamations ordering an immediate end to the killings. But it was far, far too late. The mob was a beast unleashed, drunk on bloodlust and fanaticism, and not even royal authority, the very hand that had given the initial signal, could curb the insatiable frenzy that had been awakened. For 3 consecutive, agonizing days and nights, from August 24th to August 26th, Paris was a scene of uninterrupted carnage. A city of light consumed by the deepest, most primal darkness. The horror, however, did not remain confined within the ancient walls of Paris. Like a deadly plague, fueled by fear and misinformation, news of the massacre spread like wildfire across the French provinces. It triggered similar waves of violence, plunging dozens of other cities into their own versions of hell, leaving a trail of devastation that would forever scar the soul of a nation. The true cost, in lives and in trust, was only just beginning to be counted. The screams eventually faded. The fires died down. But when the dust settled on those 3 days of absolute hell in Paris, the true magnitude of the horror began to emerge, not just in the piles of bodies, but in the shattered soul of a nation. This wasn't just a Parisian tragedy. It was a wound ripped across the entire fabric of France. The violence, as we mentioned, didn't stay confined within the ancient walls of the capital. Like a deadly contagion, news of the massacre spread rapidly through the French provinces, and what was witnessed in Paris was sickeningly replicated. In Meaux, Bourges, Orléans, Lyon, Toulouse, and dozens of other French cities, local Catholics interpreted the Parisian events as a chilling, tacit royal authorization to massacre their own Protestant neighbors. In some places, the slaughter was even more systematic, more organized than in Paris, with local authorities drawing up lists of Protestants to eliminate, carrying out mass executions with almost industrial efficiency. The total number of victims of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre and the subsequent waves of violence remains controversial among historians. Conservative estimates speak of 10,000 dead throughout the country, while others reach as high as 30,000. What is certain is that the French Protestant community was utterly devastated. Many who survived were forced to convert on the spot, their faith held at knife point, while countless others fled, becoming refugees in Protestant countries like England, Holland, and the German principalities, taking with them their skills, their wealth, and their profound trauma. The international reaction to the massacre was, for the most part, one of universal horror. Even traditionally Catholic countries like Austria expressed shock at the brutality of the events. Elizabeth I's England temporarily broke diplomatic relations with France, reeling from the barbarity. The German Protestant principalities seriously considered declaring war on France. Only Philip II's Spain and Pope Gregory XIII publicly celebrated the massacre as a victory of the Catholic faith, a stark reminder of the deep ideological chasm of the era. For France itself, the impact was devastating and lasting. The fragile trust between religious communities was utterly destroyed, perhaps forever. Catherine de' Medici's grand dream of pacifying the kingdom through Margaret and Henry of Navarre's marriage proved to be nothing but a bloody, horrifying illusion. The wars of religion resumed with renewed, desperate violence, and France remained divided, bleeding, for decades more. For King Charles IX himself, the massacre was a trauma that haunted him for the rest of his short life. Contemporary accounts paint a picture of a king plagued by constant nightmares, insomnia, and panic attacks. He died only 2 years later, in 1574, at just 24 years old. While officially from tuberculosis, many of his contemporaries believed he had died of pure, crushing remorse. And then there's Henry of Navarre, the man who survived the massacre by forcibly converting to Catholicism would, ironically, eventually become Henry IV of France. He would be the king who finally, brought peace to France with the Edict of Nantes in 1598, guaranteeing religious tolerance to Protestants. But this reconciliation, this long-sought peace, would only come after more than 2 additional decades of bloody, brutal wars that, in retrospect, could have been avoided if not for the catastrophic choices made on that fateful August night. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre remains one of the darkest, most chilling episodes in French and European history. It stands as a harrowing testament to how religious fanaticism, when combined with naked political ambitions and irrational fears, can completely strip away the veneer of civilization, transforming otherwise ordinary people into savage murderers. The massacre served as a stark, indelible warning about the dangers of intolerance, and as a chilling reminder that barbarity always lurks just beneath the surface of society. Today, more than 450 years later, France still bears the scars of those terrible August days. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre has become synonymous with religious persecution and sectarian violence. It is a historical example used worldwide to illustrate the profound dangers of religious extremism and absolute intolerance. Its memory serves as an eternal, haunting warning about the unimaginable price of religious discord and the desperate, urgent necessity of tolerance in any pluralistic society. This is a tough story to hear, and even tougher to tell, but it's crucial for us to remember these dark chapters of history. If this narrative resonated with you, if it sparked a new understanding, please consider giving this video a thumbs up. Your likes truly help these important stories reach a wider audience. If you know someone who needs to hear this powerful historical lesson, please share this video with them. And of course, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. We're constantly exploring pivotal moments and figures, and your support helps us continue this work. For more stories like the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, be sure to explore our full playlist on historical massacres and conflicts, or dark chapters of European history, or moments that changed the world. Choose the best fit for your specific playlist title. You'll find it linked right here and in the description below. And finally, what are your thoughts? What did you take away from this tragic event? We invite you to share your insights, questions, and reflections in the comments section. We read every one. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history.